I want to take you back to the binding of Isaac's story. The binding of Isaac, as we know, God tells Abraham, take your son, your only son, and bring him up on a mountain as an offering to me. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Now here's an interesting rule. Anytime it says at the beginning of a story in the Bible, after these things, in Hebrew, achar hadvarim ha'ele, after these things, the next thing happened, it means that there must be a relationship between this story and the story before it. Most stories in the Bible don't have an introductory line that says, after that happened, this happened. You just get the next story. This story ended and the next story begins. But every now and then in the Bible, there's a story that begins by saying, after that happened, this happened. The importance of that is that means that the story you're about to read is related directly to the story that came before it. That's why the Bible's saying, after that, this. So what's the story right before the story of the binding of Isaac? The next story we have in the Bible is Abraham going to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and they make a peace treaty. First, Abraham points out to Abimelech that some of his wells were stolen. Abimelech says, I don't know what you're talking about. I got nothing to do with that. Abraham drops the complaint. Abraham then gives a gift to Abimelech. We don't see Abimelech giving a gift to Abraham. And then they sign a treaty that they will not infringe on each other's property. Great rabbi in the 12th century, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. And he was a commentator that just liked to read, what do the words say? And he latches on to the fact that it says, after these things. And he explains as follows. He says, why was God testing Abraham now, right after the treaty with Abimelech? He says, the answer is that God was rebuking Abraham. Because God never told Abraham to make a treaty with Abimelech, king of the Philistines. God never told Abraham to give up a portion of the land that was promised to him and agree to someone else's sovereignty over it. And let's also remember that the Philistines are not originally from that area. They were a seafaring people that came from the Greek islands. And they had occupied, do you know what part of Israel is Philistine territory? Anyone know? It's called the Gaza Strip, and a little bit more. It extends a little further inland than the Gaza Strip. But the Gaza Strip is entirely in Philistine territory. So this is literally a story about the Gaza Strip. Okay, so Abraham goes over there to meet with Abimelech, and he signs this treaty, and God's upset at him. And God says to him, this is the words now of this rabbi in the 12th century. He said, God said to Abraham, by testing him, he said, wait a second, you decided that you're going to give up a portion of the land that I promised you to secure the safety of your children and grandchildren? Let's see how good that treaty is if you have to kill your son Isaac before he even has kids. It's pretty harsh, huh? Now, that's a very powerful teaching. I want to add something to it. Because when I read that teaching many, many years ago, I read the whole binding of Isaac's story more carefully. And I noticed something very powerful. At the end of the binding of Isaac's story, God stops Abraham from killing Isaac, and then he gives him a blessing. Let's look at the blessing Abraham gets. I will surely bless you. This is, again, the angel has just stopped Abraham from killing Isaac, and because Abraham obeyed God in being willing to sacrifice his son, he gets this blessing. Now look carefully at this blessing. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all the nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. There are three components. Let's sum this up. There are three parts to this blessing. Number one, your children will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. We've heard that before. God has told Abraham that blessing a couple of times before Genesis 22. The third part of the blessing, through your offspring, all the nations on the earth will be blessed. We've heard that before too, all the way back in Genesis 12, right? All the nations will be blessed through you. The only new blessing from God, as a result of Abraham being willing to sacrifice his only son Isaac, the only brand new blessing is that middle component. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. In other words, you will be victorious in warfare over your enemies. And folks, I say this now as someone, as I said before, who has 3 children and a son-in-law in combat units right now. God was telling Abraham that the way that you secure the future of your children and grandchildren in this land is not by giving up pieces of it to your enemies. By being willing to put up your kids' lives, only that way can you be victorious in war. I don't want your kids to die, that's why I'm not gonna take them. But your enemies are sure willing to give their lives to win. What are all those suicide bombings that we've been experiencing for decades been about? You know what that's about? As much as it's insane and demonic, let's admire them for a moment. These are dedicated people. They're willing to give up their own lives so that we will die. Do we have that level of dedication? So God was saying to Abraham, the only way you can guarantee that you can win wars is if you are willing to sacrifice. That's a heavy lesson. Let's take that in.